And he swings, hits it high and deep and gone. Still going back. Out of here. Welcome to the big leagues.
Deep to center field, and it is gone.
Wow, his first big league swing is going to be a grand slam, a home run. Swing and drive. Mountain right. Welcome to the show.
Welcome back to the Call Up, your go-to podcast on the future stars of Major League Baseball. I'm Arm Layton. He's Jack McMullen, and we've got some trade deadline talk to break down, man. This is perfect. I'm excited. I feel like we're still kind of on the eve of what will hopefully be a little bit more fun. It's July 31st. Of course, tomorrow, late afternoon, basically evening, 5 o'clock is the deadline. But we've already got enough to unpack. Some good prospects have been moved, some intriguing trades so far, and there's a lot of guys I think that we just got to break down.
Yeah, two top 100 guys for sure, and several fringy guys, probably in the 150 range. But no, man, I think we've been expecting for a long time that this was going to be a pretty crappy deadline in terms of lack of sex appeal. But hey, I didn't have Max Scherzer getting moved, but here we are seeing Max Scherzer get moved. So I think that we're going to see some teams, be presented offers that they can't refuse in what is so clearly a seller's market. And we saw the report from Ken Rosenthal, and we'll get into this on the Just Baseball show as well. But we saw the report from Ken Rosenthal that everybody is up for discussion with the White Sox now. After they shut down the cease conversations several days ago, they opened them back up. I think they saw the returns. Yeah, exactly. I wonder why.
Yeah. I mean, you see and we'll break down these returns, but you see what the Cardinals get for J-Mont, and what some of these teams are. I mean, of course, what the Angels had to give up for Giolito, and what the White Sox got in return there. Like, you got to start thinking like, man, we might have got the future of our catching position, in a rental swap for Giolito and Lopez, 2 rentals. We got to kick the tires on Dylan Cease. And I've been pretty adamant about that, because I think in this market, even with Cease not pitching to the best of his ability, he could bring in an absolute boatload of a haul in. And what's really funny too, the one last thing I wanted to mention real quick, we'll see how it ages, but the guys that have been perpetually blocked, the 3 prospects and there's several others, but the 3 that come to mind: Michael Busch, Jonathan Aranda, Joey Ortiz. Right? Busch, Dodgers; Aranda, Rays; Ortiz, Orioles. All teams that should be, pretty aggressive buyers, players that are on the 40 that just need an opportunity somewhere else. Aranda hit a 100 and something mile per hour home run that went 464 feet yesterday.
I think it was over 110.
To bring his OPS in AAA to 1,041 at the point of that batted ball.
Yeah,
I think Michael Busch hit 2 home runs, and Joey Ortiz hit a home run to bring his average over the last 25 games up over 370. Like, these guys have to get moved. So I'm looking forward to hopefully breaking them down. But I just thought that was funny. Like, right up to the deadline, these guys are playing out of their mind. Like, get me out of this situation.
The common saying in minor league baseball is not only are you auditioning for your team, but you are auditioning for the 29 other teams as well. Yeah. And you become an asset. Yeah. And the best thing for the Dodgers is if Michael Busch plays really well, because they are either, I guess, handcuffed into a situation where they have to play an incredibly talented hitter that is raking in AAA, or they're handcuffed into trading him at peak value, and they can say, hey, we've got a guy hitting 300 that's on pace for 30 pumps again. And I don't know. I find it fascinating with those guys because they have absolutely nothing left to prove in the minor leagues.
And I get it from the big league team perspective, because those are two of the 3 are very defensively limited. Ironically, the third is supremely talented defensively. So that's what are you going to do? Really tough. There's no excuse for Ortiz. I think Mateo should be kicked to the curb, and Ortiz should be doing exactly that role. But I guess they want everyday ABs. But Mateo kind of gets close to that. Aranda, I understand it. Where are you going to put him in there? Defense is important. The Rays don't need more production. I know they've been stalling lately, but
yeah. But you got Yandy at first, Lau at second, Franco at short, and Isak at third. Like,
and you're not DHing him. You're not DHing him. Like,
no.
So they're in a unique spot. And then the Dodgers are the Dodgers. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. But again, like looking at some of these returns and looking at how things are, like you might have to move one of these guys for what might be the best rental left on the market or whatever it may be. So it's probably a tough in between spot for these teams because it's like they're too good to trade for rentals, but they're not good enough to probably headline a package for, you know, a guy with control. I don't know how many guys are out there with control right now, but it's kind of this tweener spot. What trade do you want to start with?
I want to start with the Giolito one, and then we'll kind of go to most recent. So we're almost like backdating. We're starting with the most non-recent, and then we're going to go to the most recent. Actually, if we wanted to go most non-recent, what do you got on Mason McCoy going to Toronto for Trent Thornton? Anything?
No, I got nothing there. We could skip that one.
Kai Busch and Edgar Quero to Chicago for the tandem of Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez. We're not going to have the big league conversation because that is a conversation for the Just Baseball show that we had at the end of last week. So if you want our take on how Giolito and Reynaldo Lopez fit in, go listen to the Just Baseball show. But Kai Busch, Edgar Quero, we got into them a little bit. I think you're spot on, man. The White Sox acquire their catcher of the future for 2 rentals and a flyer that they're taking on a guy that was in the futures game last year.
You rarely hear buying low on a prospect, but in this case, I almost feel like the White Sox are in getting an Edgar Quero here because Quero received an extremely aggressive assignment to Double-A. And I told you, some of the people that I talked to that had some familiarity with the situation said that, Quero was assigned to Double-A, skipping high A effectively. 1, because of performance, but 2, because they really like the coaches that they have in Rocket City. And excuse me, that's been something that's pretty well documented now about how the Angels, do have some preferences to Rocket City in terms of development because some other places are bandboxes. Some other places have, other aspects to what's going on. It's unfortunate that he was sent to a place where they were using a dummy ball. But I think that they really wanted him to work with these specific coaches. And people forget like Quero just skipped high A completely. So this is a switch hitting catcher. Yes, there's not that much physical projection. He's 5'7", but he hits the ball hard enough, I think to dream on, fringe average power, but the hit tool could develop into plus. His approach is phenomenal. The defense needs to come along, but if they just stuck him in high A, like every other team would have, in a normal situation, and he puts up a 140 WRC plus, which would have been more than feasible. Look at what he did last year. Are we seeing him moved? Like sometimes I think the psychology behind the values of these guys is interesting because it's like we're penalizing him for holding his own in an assignment that most players in his position, almost a vast majority, wouldn't have got that kind of aggressive assignment.
Yeah, I think so. I also, we know better than anybody. This is such a what have you done for me lately thing. Prospecting, like Nick York's the perfect example of the pendulum swing. And Edgar Quero has not experienced that because, dude, he was 20 years old and double starting this year. But at the beginning of this year, I asked you, and I remember this vividly, like, which Quero would you rather have, Jefferson or Edgar? And that was a tough question for you to answer. Now it's pretty easy because Jefferson has totally separated himself while Edgar has looked 20 years old in Double-A. But we got to remember, like, that conversation was 4 months ago. Yeah. That's not long. And he's a 20-year-old catcher in Double-A. So he got assigned to Double-A Birmingham. He'll probably be in Birmingham for the rest of the year. They just moved a kid, Adam Hackenberg, to Triple, who's been hitting the shit out of the ball. They have, and Korey Lee too. Like, we can talk about Korey Lee in a moment if we want to, but Korey Lee's a guy that can just plug into the big league level right now and eat up some innings while Quero develops.
Yeah.
There's no rush here at all.
Yeah, and Lee we'll discuss briefly. Like, I think that's just a good body to have there, and at the worst is a fine backup and guy that can do the job. But yeah, Quero in 2022, and this was as a 19-year-old in low A, 312, 435, 530 slash line with 17 homers. Very hitter friendly environment, but still, and didn't strike out at all. 14% walk rate, 18% K rate, and through like the quote unquote disappointing season so far, does not include the 3 games in Birmingham, but 70 games in Double-A as a 20-year-old. He was 19 years old at season start, actually 19 for like basically half the season. 246, 386, 332. The slug is the issue. But that's still a 104 WRC plus. He's walking more than he strikes out. And, you know, a lot of the underlying data looks really good. I think this was a really good opportunity to pick up somebody that, you know, probably this might be the bottom of his prospect value, because I do think he's going to get rolling and kind of get himself, you know, back to where he was. Maybe not a 150 WRC plus at the upper levels, but back up to that prospect that you're like, yeah, that's one of the better offensive catching prospects in baseball. The defense keeps coming along. I think ultimately he's an average defender behind the dish at best, but again, defense is kind of becoming de-emphasized. As long as you can block, receiving is going to be less important. He's limited the running game fine. His arm's fine. So I do think that this is the future now for behind the dish for the White Sox, and to get that for a pair of rentals and getting a pitcher on top of that, who we'll get to, like, that's a pretty damn good deal.
Quero 70-ish range, 70 to 80 range in the top 100. What do you think?
Yeah, somewhere around the 60 to 80 range. I'm still kind of finalizing. He's one of the toughest ones, but the more time I put into it, the more I think he's closer to that 60 range for all of the reasons that we just said.
Yeah. Ky Bush, the other guy acquired by the White Sox. Bush had a solid year last year. He was the best pitching prospect in a horrible Angels system prior to last year's draft. He's been passed up by a couple of guys here. Bush injury hampered, and when he's been on the field, it hasn't been great so far this year. I think the ERA is a couple ticks over 5. But again, like, this guy's got enough talent for it to be worth it, especially when you're getting Quero as the big time headliner.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 6'6" lefty, big body. You hope that there's some more velocity in there. He really averages about 93 miles an hour, but you can hope that there's a little bit more in there. If there is, then, you know, you've got number 4 starter type of upside. I think he's got a good chance to start. The slider is the best pitch, and that's been a really good pitch for him this year. But the changeup has continued to come along, and that kind of helps him with the splits, because it was, you know, very fringy for him previously.
Yeah,
it's gotten better and better. This is a guy that just his command needs to be on point for him to be good. And right now the command is fringy, and that's the challenge. But I think if the command can get to above average, I really do think that you could have a back end of the rotation starter here.
So he looked really strong last year because the command was solid. Command was well under, I think, 3 walks per 9. Now it's, you know, closer to 5 walks per 9. And again, limited sample. I think it's like 26 innings in double so far, and he's walked 14. But I mean, the K numbers are up a little bit. He was under a strikeout per inning last year. Now he's a little bit over a strikeout per inning. He's not a stuff guy, though. Like, he's a pitch to contact, land that slider for strikes and get ground balls. I don't know, feels counterintuitive for a guy that's 6'6", 240, like you're saying. Like, big dude should be able to blow by hitters. That's just not who Ky Bush is.
Yeah, and I think with Bush, the command challenges may be coming from, you know, the injury, and like kind of I think he's had multiple injuries, you know, over the last couple years, and specifically over the last year. And I know he had, you know, another one in an extended spring, so, you know, that might be affecting him a little bit. His first start in Birmingham for Birmingham in Biloxi was a bit of a disaster, but Biloxi can be a launch pad. So, yeah, we'll see. I think this is ultimately, you know, not a guy that the Angels are losing sleep over parting with, but again, for the White Sox to get a top 30 prospect pitcher, he's a top 30 in the system, like that's worth it. You know, it's solid on top of Edgar Quero. I think this would have been a good trade just with Quero alone. So they get a pitcher who has a chance at starting on top. He's not ranked as high as, you know, all the national writers said he was when they looked at Pipeline or whatever. He's not that guy, but he is still one of the better arms that they had to offer at this point. And, you know, I think that's a pretty good get on top of Quero.
Yep. Real quick, Carlos Santana goes to Milwaukee for Johnny Severino, who was signed for over $1 million in IFA last year by Milwaukee. DSL last year, 48 games. He slashed 268, 333, 391 to 724 OPS, 10 for 11 in the stolen base department. Strikeouts were a problem in the DSL. He comes stateside, played 12 games in the ACL for Milwaukee. He had an 870 OPS. He goes yard in his only game so far at the complex with the Pirates too. 18-year-old flyer. This was exactly what you're going to get for Carlos Santana. And I think Ben Cherington is hoping that the development side of his farm system can work their magic with a guy that was a big ticket IFA guy.
Yeah, he's definitely been a disappointment, relatively speaking. Sorry, it feels weird to say that about an 18-year-old, but
right,
he hasn't.
But he signed for 1.1.
Yeah, he hasn't looked like $1 million guy just yet, but he has looked slightly better this year. The contact rates have been better against better competition, so it's an opportunity to snag up a complex guy and see what you got here. I think that was a nice little get for Carlos Santana, right? Like, these are guys that you sign for the goal of flipping for a lottery ticket, and it's exactly what they did.
Yep. Miami, they got David Robertson for 2 lottery tickets, and you think the Mets made out really well here. Ronald Hernandez, a catcher, and Marco Vargas, who is as advanced a bat as you will find in an 18-year-old at the complex. Yeah.
Yeah, this was a lot for the Marlins to give up here. And, people, I feel like you have to call anybody at the complex level a lottery ticket, but I think Marco Vargas is could be the exception to the lottery ticket, conversation when we talk about these rookie level guys. Not to say that Vargas is a guarantee to be a big league bat, but I think he's a guarantee to put up solid numbers and full season ball, and then we'll see how he develops at the upper levels. Like, this is a guy that I'm expecting to make a very smooth transition into low A. We ID those guys, I think before the year, some of the Luis Lauras of the world. I don't think he's as elite bat to ball, but he's not that far off. Luis Lara with the Brewers, that was a guy we knew when he got to low A, he was going to put up pretty solid numbers. Vargas, left-handed bat, smooth swing. I'll be honest with you, the Marlins fan in me, when I saw the trade go down, said, anybody but Vargas, to be honest. I would have rather probably even moved Yiddy Cape and some of those other guys than Marco Vargas. Just turned 18. Zone contact rate spectacular. The chase rate's extremely low. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's pushing 90% zone contact. It's a small sample, 30 games, but again, last year he was really impressive as well. If you go back and listen to our Marlins episode, I gushed about him for the Marlins top 10 going into this year. Chase rate at 17 to 18% for a complex kid when everybody around you is effectively wild is extremely impressive. And the exit velocities continue to sneak up there. He's already popping some 105s. I think he snuck in a 106. That's pretty impressive for a contact first prospect who is just 18 years old and still filling out. I thought this was a phenomenal get for a team in the Mets that have historically neglected the complex level prospects, right? They usually trade them away. The Hector Rodriguez, Endy Rodriguez, Pete Crow Armstrong doesn't really count because it's a first round pick, but they usually neglect these guys, and now they're targeting them. Vargas was a phenomenal get, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's on top 100 list before long.
The 180 that the Mets have taken here is absolutely freaking insane. And I mean, we've talked about this several times here, the Mets being willing to part with cash. Robertson, they didn't do it here, but I mean, they did it with Scherzer to go get Luisangel Acuña, which we're going to get to here in a matter of moments. But I mean, the fact that they are willing to totally pivot to, we don't give a shit about the farm, we're going to make this big league team as good as possible, to we're going to sell a $40 million guy, we're going to sell a $10 million reliever, and we're going to prioritize the farm, is absolutely insane. And I think that they're doing a great job right now, because for the longest time, the Mets were always bottom of the barrel in terms of farm, in terms of player development. It took a guy like a Brett Beatty to stand out, like a Francisco Alvarez to stand out. Those were top 10 prospects in baseball.
And those were all big, first round pick, expensive international free agent. The big ticket guys were fine, but it was nothing between the margins there. They were giving away the between the margins. Hector Rodriguez for Tyler Naquin, Endy Rodriguez, for Joey
Musgrove for Lucchesi. Yeah.
It was in part of the Musgrove deal, but ultimately in a vacuum, it was Lucchesi for Endy Rodriguez. That's crazy. And there's probably other examples in the past. So I think that you kind of learn your lesson the hard way. And Vargas is a great get. I think he's instantly one of their better prospects. I think he's better than Jet Williams. I really do. And that's a guy that I know a lot of Mets fans like, but there's a natural bias to draft guys versus IFA because of just the hype that comes around these guys, and we don't have anything on them when they're in international
video pre-draft. Exactly. Yeah.
But to be honest, they're both very volatile. Maybe it's one slightly more than the other, but I'm telling you, if you put Marco Vargas in college, he would just be going to his freshman year in college, by the way. he would light it up. So, or even if he was playing stateside in high school, he's probably putting up video game numbers and is one of the favorite, draft prospects right now. He would probably be draft eligible going into the next draft as it just turned 18. So there's an interesting psychology of it, but I think Vargas was a great get for them. And then Ronald Hernandez on top of that, solid get. Switch hitting catcher. I don't know if he's going to stick there, but the bat to ball skills are also pretty good. Not plus like Vargas, but pretty good. A little bit more power projection. And another just solid piece to add from the complex level that's putting up good numbers.
What do you have on this T. Thompson outfielder going from the Dodgers to Chicago for Lance Lynn and Joe Kelly?
Oh, that's Clay's brother, right?
Yeah, that's Clay's brother.
That's so classic, dude. I was surprised that he was thrown into that deal, but why do you think the White Sox wanted Trace Thompson?
They wanted him to be a White Sox for the third time.
Yeah, do you think that was a Reinsdorf call? Like, hey,
yeah, it's like, I remember Trace. Let's get him.
We gave up on him too early, and we owe him one.
We owe him one. Yeah, I fired Tony La Russa in '86, so I owe him one in 2021.
Yeah,
that's how that typically works. Nick Nastrini and Jordan Leisure were the prospects that came back for Lance Lynn and Joe Kelly. Leisure, this was actually the first time I had heard Leisure's name. Reliever in AA. So when you get past that Tulsa Drillers rotation, you had to make your way to a guy that is punching out 15 guys per nine this year. Walks were a bit of a problem for Leisure, but not too bad. He was one of Tulsa's best relievers, it looked like.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's just one of those guys that the Dodgers are probably fine parting with because he's limited to a bullpen role, and he's
24 years old already.
But to get that guy in a supplemental piece in a deal, you got to feel pretty good because there's a good chance that he's a big league reliever in some capacity. So, I mean, the stuff's really good. It's just about the command, and he just fits the bill of those like Tulsa Driller guys. Nick Nastrini, though, that's the get here, right? And that's the guy that ultimately could end up being one of the better White Sox pitching prospects relatively immediately.
He's probably number 2 behind Noah Schultz. Yeah.
Noah Schultz, you could see where like he's better than Peyton Pallette. Like he's better than,
is he better than Mena? He's probably better than Mena.
Yeah, I guess it depends who you ask, but like, I think he might be better than Mena. Like the stuff is, the one thing that's been interesting to me with Nastrini is that the velo is ticked down slightly over his last few starts. So I don't know if that's just like an innings management thing that needs to be done or what the deal is, but the last couple of starts I've seen him like tick down slightly because early in the year he was kind of sitting 95, 96, grabbing a lot of 7s. Last few starts he's been more 93, 94, grabbing some 5s. But I mean, this guy's got some crazy whiff stuff. The fastball really takes off. It's a good swing and miss pitch. The slider has just been the slider and the curveball have always been there for him. He's had 2 distinct breaking balls that really have just been big time swing and miss pitches. And then he even mixes in a changeup that, he needs to find more consistency with it. But when he throws it around the zone, it is nasty. Like it is absolutely nasty. Opponents are hitting $160 against it this year. In zone whiff is near 50%. Like if it's in the zone, no one has a shot. 30% swinging strike rate. Like that pitch could be elite. So he has a chance for a really impressive 4-pitch arsenal, but can he be stretched out consistently? Can he throw enough strikes? Those are the questions, but he has the floor of a high leverage reliever. And I think he's got a good chance to be a starter with that pitch mix.
Dude, there were so many guys in that rotation. Like I'm thinking, okay, you part with one, like you're not going to part with Sheehan. Nick Frasso. I like Frasso, I think, more than Nastrini.
Yeah, I would imagine that the Dodgers, right, like from a data standpoint, I know Frasso's older, but I think, when you look at some of the underlying stuff and probably a lot of the things that the Dodgers look at, Frasso's a little bit more of an outlier with the stuff.
How about River Ryan?
There's some people that think River Ryan's a top 50 prospect. So
are you one of those people?
No, but I think River Ryan's really damn good. I would rather have River Ryan. So yeah.
Got you. Maddox Bruns. I know he's high A right now, but
that's a first round pick. So I think this was the guy that they were willing to part with. And then Landon Knack's not good enough. So I think
Knack is 26. He wouldn't have gotten you this.
No. So this was kind of a sweet spot here. And that's what happens when you have a bajillion pitching prospects and you have a bajillion, pieces. You can kind of pick the right guy that fits the unique deal. And Nastrini was the exact perfect fit here. I thought it was a very fair swap for both sides.
Yeah. Houston, they went and got Kendall Graveman. They gave Korey Lee to Chicago in return. I have nothing more to add than what we just talked about. Hi, Kona. What's up, doggy? In the background on YouTube.
You see the
nice
German
lead.
Shepherd just jumping around in the house. But yeah, that's she's a nut. But yeah, that was one where it's like, what are you going to get for Kendall Graveman? He's been, kind of a fraction of what he is, he was previously. Korey Lee was like the inevitable trade chip from the Astros, just because I don't know. Yainer Diaz is just a better version of Korey Lee. Lee is just kind of just been a guy that's stalled out in the quadruple A role, so to speak. But that said, again, if you're the White Sox and you don't have a lot of catching depth in your system, you happily welcome a Korey Lee, because there's a great chance he's a solid backup. You hope
when
that
they trade Grandal, he might start games.
Yeah, he can't be worse. And also, like, catchers, how often are we seeing catchers just continue to be late bloomers because the position is so hard? How many catchers just figure it out at 27, 28? I could list you a bajillion. Like, there's so many that just figure it out way later, like a Jake Rogers right now. Jacob Stalling stinks, but like he was a guy that figured it out way later. Jonah Heim, younger, but like that was a guy that didn't look like anything like he was now. And I'm not saying he's going to be any of those guys, but I'm all in on accumulating relatively talented catching prospects, even if they're 24, 25. Because for me, a catching prospect at 24 is like a position player prospect at 22, just because it's so much harder and takes so much more time. Lee helps them now. He gives them a shot for something a little bit more in the future. I'm not a big fan of his, but again, for a reliever, no brainer swap. Rick Hahn's doing a decent job right now. Weirdly,
I think he's doing a good job. Yeah. I'd elevate it from decent. Like the fact that, and again, might just be a matter of the market. I don't want to give him like too much credit because, he's moving failed pieces in like a Lance Lynn and a Kelly, but no, man, I think he is doing a great job maximizing returns right now. Mets, again, we're getting to the big fish, the 1-for-1 swap. You have about $30 million going from the Mets to Texas. Texas over the next, I guess, year and 2 months is going to pay Max Scherzer 22.5. But they get Max Scherzer, and the Mets ponied up to get Luisangel Acuña in return. Acuña is a top 100 prospect.
Oh, yeah.
And the more that I personally dive into Luisangel Acuña, the more I'm like, okay, this guy might just hit the ground running everywhere he goes.
Yeah, it worked out really well where, I just updated the Luisangel Acuña write-up for our top 100 update coming in a few days, very recently. So it was great to be able to like have very recent thoughts and updated thoughts on him when the trade went down. But this guy just keeps getting better, and surprise, surprise, he's Ronald Acuña's brother. And sometimes I think the association is a little bit much, especially when it's like Brian Acuña, who's yet to play a game. And
or like a Choreo. Yeah.
I pulled his card and sold it for like $600. And it was like, I felt like I was robbing somebody. Even though they bid very, very aggressively to get it. Like, it's just one of those things. But, I think that this is one of those where you can see the talent and you can see him continuing to build on it. He's 21 years old. He's not going to be the power bat that his brother is. He doesn't have multiple 80 grade tools like his brother, but he has good tools across the board. I see above average feel to hit. I see a plus wheels. He's an elite base stealer. There's sneaky pop there. I'd say slightly above average power that he does a decent job getting into. And then I love the glove. At shortstop, and I know the Mets don't need a shortstop, but at shortstop, he's a borderline plus defender for me. That was a fun video dive. He could play second. He could play third if you wanted him to. He was starting to see some action in center. This was a great prospect to get, period. The number one thing that stood out to me is his lower half was a little bit shaky last year. He has the same setup as his brother. So it's the hands kind of out,
identical,
the load into the back hip, and then fire from the back hip. But he didn't have that Ronald Acuña type of swing off the back leg as much. He was drifting back forward. And with that drift forward, he was kind of crowding himself. So against velocity last year, he had just a 600 OPS against 94 plus. And this year, you see the improvements with the lower half. I was so excited to queue up 94 plus. I'm like, your lower half looks better. How's it going to look? 765 OPS against 94 plus, which is really good because he punishes breaking balls and he punishes everything else. So he's heading in the right direction. I think the Mets may have picked him up just before he kind of hits that blue chip prospect type of range. Right now he's kind of like just in between. And I think this was a great get. They had to kick money, but definitely worth it when money ain't a thing.
I wonder where the future spot is for him, because you mentioned they don't have an opening at shortstop in Lindor. They don't have an opening at second in McNeil, who just signed a 5-year extension. I mean, Beatty still looks like the future. Beatty at third, and then in center, they just paid Brandon Nimmo over 6-7 years. So like, if he's good enough, he's going to take a spot. That's just how that works.
Yeah, maybe you slide Nimmo eventually to left, because this would be a year or two from now, and who knows how Nimmo's moving out there at that point. Want to keep him healthy. Acuña was seeing a little bit more action at center field. I think it was like almost once a week they'd give him that start in center field, and he looked pretty decent out there. I got to dive a little bit more into it. Hopefully, we get some more reps out there, but elite base stealer too. Like, what is it? 40? What does he have? 43 now at this point?
42 for 47.
I mean, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So this is a great piece, and he's 21. So I think Mets fans have to be excited about Luisangel, and now we got double Acuñas in the NL East very soon. That the reporters are gonna just beat that one to death every time they play against each other.
Oh yes, couple of Cardinal returns before we get to a conversation with Jared Jones, the Pirates prospect, and Connor Phillips, the Reds prospect, both of which kind of look like fringe top 100 arms. I think Jones maybe inside, Phillips just on the outside.
Both could kind of force their way in as a few more guys graduate at the 11th hour. I think both are top 100 talents. You can say without a doubt.
Got you. All right, let's start with Toronto. Jordan Hicks acquired by the Blue Jays. Intern Sem Robberse, noted futures game legend, and Adam Kloffenstein go back in return. Sem Robberse, unorthodox arm slot, 93-94 with the heater. Solid, could be a 4, could be a 5, and Kloffenstein, looks like a reliever?
So it's funny, Kloffenstein, I would have had like reliever all over him before. He's seen his stuff tick up this year, and I know he was an 18 draftee, so it feels like he's been around for forever, but he's yet to turn 23. The stuff is ticked up this year. Fastball is up a tick. Everything else is, slider, cutters all up a tick. I think he's got a chance to be that swingman type, maybe the upside of a 4 or 5. As the stuff continues to get better, the command has gotten a little bit better as well. That cutter is pretty darn good, and gives him a big league floor, because I think that cutter's a big league pitch. But it's whether it's middle relief or a little bit higher leverage, or that swingman to fringe starter type. Robberse is fun. We talked about him. I mean, like, it's a cool story out of, the Netherlands. But he's somebody that I don't think anything jumps off the page, but a lot of different pitches have some intrigue. I think all of his secondaries have a shot to be above average. So you'd think he'd be way better, right? If you have a curve, a change, and a slider, and even a cutter that he mixes in, that all have a chance to be average or better, you're like, oh, that guy's definitely a number 5 starter at least. But the fastball stinks, and that's the problem. The fastball has been pummeled this year. Opponents are slashing 310, 402, 593. It's a 994 OPS against this fastball. So what's interesting is he should actually be horrible this year by that, because I always talk about how, like, you're as good as your fastball, right? But like, no, he's been able to be effective, and opponents overall are hitting, in the low 200s with an OPS below 700, because the secondaries have been so solid and the command's been decent. So if he can get that fastball to even be average, he could be a really solid 4 starter. So there's something there. And I think, ultimately you're giving up a reliever that, I know he's got sex appeal because he throws a bajillion miles an hour, but like, at the end of the day, like, is Hicks really that lights out back end guy?
No,
probably
he's a
not.
Rental.
Yeah, it's a rental, and he's not that, he's not that much of a guarantee to be great. I thought it was a pretty good get for the Cardinals, who are also looking to stockpile arms.
And there are days where Jordan Hicks can't find the K box with a gun to his head. So I don't think that this is a bad move at all. And I mean, it was pretty clear what the Cardinals were going to do. If Jordan Hicks didn't sign a multi-year extension, they were going to trade it. Yeah, he clearly didn't sign the multi-year extension. So go get a guy that, could be a top 10 prospect in your system with a lot of these recent grads, for a rental reliever. Jordan Montgomery, rental starter. Chris Stratton, rental reliever. They send that to Texas. St. Louis turns that into John King, who's been a reliever for like 5 years and is super, super average. Thomas Saggese, 5th-round pick in 2020, high school guy, and TK Roby, the right-handed arm. Saggese and Roby are very intriguing pieces going to St. Louis.
Yeah, I think Roby's not on the table in a deal like this if he had not gotten hurt. This is like the second injury he's had in a little bit, and I'll get into the stuff there. But Roby's extremely talented. Saggese, I was writing up a tweet on him, and I was like, as I was kind of looking at everything, and he's a guy we've talked about a little bit on the show. He's just like one of those dudes that's hit at every single stop, but is kind of underrated because he was a mid-round pick or a little, at least just after day one. Doesn't have that one plus tool that everybody gets excited about, but it's above average tools pretty much across the board. It's fantastic production. He's still just 21. And it reminds me of Brendan Donovan. Is it not similar when you look at the minor league numbers and you look at the lack of fanfare? There's a lot of similarities to Brendan Donovan. And similarly, he plays second, he plays third. He can get by it short when you need him to. I'm sure if you wanted to put him in left, he'd be just fine because he's a great athlete. Sneaky power that I don't think he gets enough credit for. Good feel to hit. He's just a really good ball player. Like, he's just your classic ball player. And I think he's going to get up quick. I think he is the floor of a utility piece, but one of those guys that ends up playing every day because he's hitting so much.
Yeah, so I think Donovan is the perfect comp. I'm also thinking he was expendable because Justin Foscue is like a better version of him in that Rangers system.
Yeah, yeah. I think bat-wise, absolutely. The thing with Saggese, he's a good glove at multiple spots.
Yeah, and Foscue can't play short. Foscue could play second or third, but
barely. Yeah,
Saggese can play short.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess thinking about where Saggese kind of fits in, and Acuña for that matter, where you've got two infielders that you just dealt away. Okay. Josh Young is holding down third base for the next 5 years after this. Corey Seager's holding down shortstop for the next decade. Marcus Semion's holding down second base for the next 5 years after this. There's no space to put him, assuming full health. And even if you don't have full health, Ezekiel Durant, yes, he's been playing a lot of outfield, but that guy can play the infield too. So I don't know. There's just so much traffic there. They dealt from a spot of massive surplus.
100%. And again, you're not going to really feel it if you're the Rangers, but if you're a team that's acquiring, you feel pretty good about it. And that's the sign of a telltale sign of a great farm system. But to your point, you lay it out. There's a lot of guys, ahead of them in the pecking order. And when you look at TK Roby, you have to look at it from the lens of the risk that he comes with. I think the command is really darn good for how good the stuff is. But really, it's about the injuries, right? And that's been the issue. Jack Leiter's high risk for different reasons. They have some other guys that are high risk for other reasons. But Roby still carries enough value here. He was off to a pretty darn good start in terms of stuff this year, which is important. Of course, I think he was outperforming that 5 ERA by a good margin. And the fastball was up to 97, and it was sitting 95. The curveball was a hammer of a pitch, and the slider and changeup both have a chance to be above average. You're taking a flyer hoping he stays healthy, but he's 21. He definitely has as much upside as anybody that's getting moved pitching wise so far at this deadline. If I can't remember anyone else,
Nastrini.
Nastrini, yeah. So I'd say him and Nastrini. They're kind of cut from a similar cloth here, and if Roby can stay healthy, it's a great get for the Cardinals. But either way, I thought this was a pretty darn good return.
Yeah, we were talking about it a little bit. I think right before we started recording, that 2-pitch mix of the fastball and the curveball. You mentioned his slider and changeup pretty decent, but I like watching that fastball that lives well top of the zone. It's you can see it carry. It hangs on that clothesline, and then he has this vertical sharp, almost 12-6 type curveball, type power curve that drops off that. And I think that sequence, if you can screw with a hitter vertically, that's beautiful. And I think that he can do just that.
100%. And I think he was really unlucky through the first handful of games. It wasn't like he was getting hit hard for home runs. I don't think there was a lot of things that looked bad to me. So I think if he's healthy, he's going to really build on what was, I thought, stuff wise and underlying data wise, a really good start to the year.
Cool.